All right, time to dive deep again. This time, we're rocketing back to the 60s, the Apollo program, landing on the moon, the whole space race thing.
Yeah,
But we're going deeper than just the what, right?
right.
We're going to figure out the how. And our launch pad,
Okay.
Wikipedia's Apollo program article, packed with details.
Lots to uncover there.
It really is.
It's amazing how often we kind of just skip over how audacious this whole thing was.
Yeah,
I mean, 1961, Kennedy makes that moonshot speech,
right.
and the U.S. had barely, just barely gotten into space at all.
Yeah, just a toe in the water, right? It was just Alan Shepard, right?
That's it.
Just one American had even been up. So how do you go from that to a whole moon landing program in less than 10 years?
Well, you need a total transformation of NASA, right?
Hmm.
It's not just about rockets and spacesuits. It was 400,000 people, thousands of companies, universities. It was a national effort.
It's like this giant puzzle with pieces all over the country.
Absolutely.
Did they basically have to invent project management on this scale?
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Wow.
Controlling costs, hitting those deadlines, that takes a whole new level of organization coordination.
Yeah.
But beyond all the logistics, there's this incredible human side to it, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember Kennedy's speech at Rice University? We choose to go to the moon.
Because they are hard.
Oh,
Man, chills.
right.
That sums up the whole era.
Captures it perfectly.
But okay, inspiration's great.
Sure.
But there were some huge technical challenges. I mean, how do you even get to the moon?
Right.
I was reading about all these different mission modes they were considering.
Yeah, they had a few options on the table.
Yeah.
4 main ones: direct ascent, Earth orbit rendezvous, lunar surface rendezvous,
Okay.
and then finally lunar orbit rendezvous, LOR. You
Lore.
can imagine the debates, the calculations, all the risks they had to weigh.
Okay, so why did lore win out?
Yeah,
It seems super complicated with the rendezvous and docking in lunar orbit.
you're right. It was considered really, really risky at the time because nobody had ever done anything like that before.
Right.
But LOR had one big advantage: efficiency.
Okay.
If you land a smaller craft on the moon, that means a smaller launch mass, which is super important with the rocket technology they had then.
I see. So it's all about what you can actually launch.
Exactly. But not everyone was on board at first.
Okay, is this where John Hobolt comes in? This
Yes.
engineer, he was like super into lore.
Yeah, he was a huge advocate.
Kind of like a Lon Voice, right?
Absolutely. He really believed in it, wasn't afraid to go against the grain. Imagine sending memo after memo to the top brass at NASA, pushing
Wow.
for this idea that seemed kind of out there at the time.
And talk about persistence, right?
Persistence, that's the word.
And it paid off in a big way.
It did.
Not just because lore was efficient, it had this unexpected safety benefit.
You're thinking of Apollo 13, right?
Yeah, that crippled spacecraft. It was the lunar module, the thing designed for landing that actually brought them home.
A true lifeboat. It's amazing how things turned out that way. Hubolt's idea, which started with efficiency,
Yeah,
ended up saving lives.
amazing how these things work out.
Yeah, it is. And speaking of Apollo 13, the entire spacecraft, with all its separate modules, was really an engineering marvel.
Oh, for sure.
You had the Command Service Module, CSM, built by North American Aviation, and the Lunar Module, the LM, built by Grumman.
I always picture these super talented engineers working on these separate parts, knowing they got to fit together perfectly for this incredibly complex mission.
Right.
The pressure must have been intense. What were some of the biggest, I don't know, engineering hurdles they had to get over?
Oh, tons. Think about the heat shields.
Okay.
Re-entry coming back into the Earth atmosphere that generates insane heat. Designing a shield that could handle that and protect the crew, huge challenge.
That's incredible.
And then you got life support systems,
Right.
creating this little bubble of Earth, basically inside the spacecraft,
Wow.
to keep the astronauts alive in the vacuum of space.
It's mind-boggling.
It is.
And of course, you can't talk Apollo without the Saturn rockets.
Right.
Especially the Saturn V.
Oh, yeah.
The absolute unit.
It's a beast.
It's the biggest rocket ever built, right?
It is, as far as we know.
Amazing. But the Saturn V wasn't the only rocket in the program, right?
No, not at all. They also have the Saturn I for early tests.
Okay.
And the Little Joe 2, specifically for testing the launch escape system.
Right.
They were all important steps to get to the moon.
So it sounds like they were very methodical about it.
Oh, absolutely. Very step by step.
Yeah. Each success building on the last one.
Each one was a building block.
I gotta ask, did they always plan to use the Saturn V, or was there ever an idea of an even bigger rocket?
That's a great question. And this is where the load decision comes in.
Okay.
Originally, they had this idea for a massive rocket bigger than the Saturn V called the Nova.
The Nova? Wow.
But by going with LOR, They realized they could achieve their goals with the Saturn V.
I see.
So it was finding that balance,
Right,
ambition, but also what's actually possible.
right. Being practical, too.
Exactly.
Now, we got to talk about the human side of this mission. The astronauts,
Of course.
pretty exclusive group, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Only 24 of the 32 assigned to Apollo actually flew around the moon. And of
Wow.
course, only 12 walked on the surface.
Yeah, that's the ultimate club.
The most exclusive club in history.
So how did they pick who got to go? What were they looking for in an Apollo astronaut?
Well, that's where D. Slayton comes in.
Okay.
He was a grounded Mercury astronaut himself,
I see.
and he headed up crew selection. Think of it as director of flight crew operations. They needed top-notch piloting skills, engineering knowledge, the ability to stay cool under pressure.
Yeah.
You know, the right stuff, as Tom Wolfe put it.
That's a great book. It's so sad, though, thinking that not everyone chosen actually got to live out their dreams.
Yeah.
That Apollo 1 fire, losing Grissom, White, and Chaffee, it's a stark reminder of the risks involved.
Absolutely. A devastating event.
Yeah.
Forced NASA to completely reevaluate safety procedures, make changes to the spacecraft design, and really double down on minimizing risk.
It's my understanding that the entire program was structured to try to mitigate risk as much as possible.
Yeah,
This very deliberate buildup to the lunar landing.
right.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So it's all about testing and learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And increasing the complexity of each mission as they went along. They had this lettered mission sequence,
Okay.
A, B, C, and so on. First, uncrewed tests of the Saturn V, then the lunar module getting tested in space, then crewed Earth orbit tests of the CSM. Each step was crucial before they could move on to the next one.
So they were like methodically checking off boxes, making sure everything worked perfectly before even trying for the moon.
Yeah, like a checklist.
But even with all that planning, there were still times they had to, I don't know, make these bold choices,
Definitely.
maybe even risky ones.
Oh, absolutely. Case in point, Apollo 8.
Okay.
Remember, this is 1968. The space race is still hot.
Yeah.
Instead of another Earth orbit test, NASA decides to send Apollo 8 all the way to the moon.
Wow. Talk about gamble.
Big gamble.
What made them make that decision?
Well, there were a few things. They heard, intelligence reports that the Soviets were getting close to launching their own crewed lunar mission.
Ah, so they didn't want to get left behind.
Exactly. But it was also a chance to get some valuable experience in lunar orbit, which they would need for the landing, of course.
Right, right. So they basically jumped ahead in their schedule,
They did.
trusting the technology, the crew,
Huge leap of faith.
and it worked.
It did. Apollo 8 became the first crewed mission to orbit the moon. Major win in the space race.
Huge.
A real turning point, I'd say.
Yeah.
Showed that NASA could be methodical, but also daring. They could adapt to challenges and seize opportunities. That flexibility was crucial as they got closer to the moon landing.
Yeah, because that's the big one, right? The thing everyone remembers. The lunar landings.
Of course,
Apollo 11, those first blueprints on the surface, captured the world's imagination.
absolutely iconic.
Yeah.
But remember, Apollo 11 was just the beginning. They actually had 6 successful Apollo missions that landed on the moon.
Wow.
Apollo 11 showed it could be done.
Yeah.
Those later missions, Apollo 12 through 17, those were all about exploring, doing science, really understanding the moon.
It's amazing how each mission kind of built on the last one.
Yeah.
Like Apollo 12, they managed to land right near the Surveyor 3 probe.
Talk about precision.
And then Apollo 15, they had the rover
The moon buggy, so cool.
driving around on the moon. Can you imagine?
Each mission brought something new, pushing those boundaries of lunar exploration. Like Apollo 14, they hold the record for the longest moonwalk at the time.
Wow.
But beyond all the achievements, it's important to remember the scientific value of these missions.
Right.
They brought back tons of lunar samples, over 842 pounds of rock and soil.
That's a lot of moon.
It's incredible. And every time they analyzed those samples, they learned something new about the moon's history, how it formed.
Yeah, it's like a time capsule.
Absolutely. It changed how we understand the moon,
Yeah.
giving us information we could never have gotten from Earth. And the impact of Apollo went way beyond just the moon itself.
It did, it did. I've read about all the tech that came out of the program, like cordless tools, fireproof materials, even stuff in medicine. It's amazing how this quest to reach the moon ended up benefiting us in ways they probably never even imagined.
It's true. Shows you the ripple effect of these ambitious scientific projects.
But sadly, Apollo wasn't immune to budget cuts.
Right.
You know, politics changing.
It happens.
I'm thinking about those missions they canceled, Apollos 18, 19, and 20.
Oh, yeah.
They were supposed to explore even more of the moon, right?
They were.
It's a shame they never happened.
Yeah, it is. It reminds us that even the most ambitious projects can get derailed by funding issues and politics.
That's true.
But even though it ended early, Apollo's legacy is huge.
Absolutely.
It spurred so much innovation expanded our understanding of the moon, and, maybe most importantly, it inspired generations of people to dream about space.
It's that sense of wonder, that possibility that Apollo captured.
Yeah,
Something we can all connect with, even all these years later.
it's timeless.
And speaking of legacies, there's this whole other side of Apollo that people don't always talk about, the Apollo Applications Program.
Right.
It was all about using the technology and knowledge from Apollo for new things, like Skylab.
Yes, Skylab, the first U.S. space
It
station.
was this orbiting lab, right?
Yep, they did all sorts of experiments up there studying the sun, growing plants in zero gravity.
It's incredible.
And then, of course, there was the Apollo-Soyuz test project.
Right, that joint mission with the Soviets in '75.
Yeah, an Apollo spacecraft docked with a Soyuz capsule.
Symbol of the Cold War thawing a little.
Exactly, the beginning of international cooperation in space.
It's amazing to think that this program, born out of, competition, Cold War tensions, ended up paving the way for working together.
Full circle, a shared human endeavor in space.
Yeah, and that spirit continues today with the International Space Station.
Absolutely.
A testament to the lasting impact of Apollo.
It really is.
So it's clear that Apollo was more than just a race to the moon. It was exploration, innovation, human resilience.
All of that.
A story that keeps inspiring us today.
Definitely. And that brings us back to our original question. What made the Apollo program so successful?
It's hard to pick just one thing, right? Was it the political will, the brilliance of the engineers, or the pure grit of the astronauts?
It was a bit of everything, really. A nation united by this bold vision,
Yeah.
incredible resources poured into research and development,
Mhm.
a workforce dedicated to pushing the limits of what was possible.
And let's not forget about the risk they were willing to take.
You're right.
Like choosing Euler, sending Apollo 8 to the moon
Right.
when they weren't even sure it would work.
Big decisions.
Yeah.
And that highlights something crucial about Apollo's success: adaptability.
Okay.
They learned from their mistakes, like the Apollo 1 fire, and they constantly adapted their approach.
So it's not just about planning, but being able to change course when you need to.
Exactly. Being flexible.
And I'm also struck by the sheer scale of human collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of people working together, each one with their own expertise, towards this one incredible goal.
It's really inspiring when you think about it. In less than a decade, they went from putting one person in space to landing 2 on the moon and bringing them back safely.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
It is.
Makes you wonder what other moonshots we could achieve today if we had that same, I don't know, spirit of innovation and collaboration.
It's a good question.
What challenges could we overcome
What seems impossible now.
if we really set our sights on it?
That's the challenge Apollo's legacy throws down to us.
Yeah,
It's a reminder that human potential is, well, limitless.
it really is.
Even when we face huge obstacles, we can do amazing things.
It's inspiring.
It is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Apollo program,
Okay?
what's the one thing you want our listener to walk away with?
I think it's this. Apollo wasn't just about getting to the moon. It was about pushing the boundaries of human ingenuity,
Yeah.
proving we're capable of so much more than we think.
Such a powerful message, a reminder that we can achieve anything we set our minds to. So keep exploring, keep asking questions,
Exactly.
and who knows, maybe you'll be part of the next giant leap.
Maybe.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Apollo program.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it really has.
Catch you next time.
See ya. It must have been a pretty tough selection process. What exactly were they looking for?
Well, they had Deke Slayton, a Mercury astronaut, grounded, but he was in charge of picking the crews.
Okay.
Director of flight crew operations, top-notch pilots, of course, engineering know-how. And you had to be able to handle the pressure,
Yeah.
the right stuff, to borrow Tom Wolfe's phrase.
It's tragic. Not everyone who was chosen got to actually live out their dream. The Apollo 1 fire, losing Grissom, White, and Chaffee.
It's a stark reminder of the dangers involved.
Definitely.
A devastating event. It forced NASA to take a hard look at their safety procedures, change the spacecraft design,
Yeah.
really focus on minimizing risk.
And it's my understanding that the whole Apollo program was set up to try to reduce risk as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
This very deliberate, build up to the lunar landing.
They had a plan.
Can you talk about that a bit?
It was all about testing, learning, right?
Right.
And making each mission more complex as they went along. They had this lettered sequence,
Okay.
A, B, C, and so on. Uncrewed tests of the Saturn V first, then the lunar module gets its turn out in space, then crewed Earth orbit tests of the CSM. Each one had to be a success before moving on to the next.
So it's like methodically going through the checklist,
Exactly.
making sure everything worked perfectly before even attempting to go to the moon.
You got it.
But even with all that planning, I mean, there were times they had to make some some tough calls, right?
Oh, yeah,
Bold decisions.
absolutely. Take Apollo 8, for example.
Okay.
1968, the space race is still on.
Right, heating up.
And instead of another Earth orbit test, what does NASA do?
What?
They sent Apollo 8 all the way to the moon.
Wow, that's a huge gamble.
It was.
What led to that?
Well, they had some intel that the Soviets were close to launching their own crewed lunar mission.
So they didn't want to be left in the dust.
Exactly. Plus, it was a chance to get some experience in lunar orbit,
Yeah.
essential for the landing later on.
So they basically just like skipped ahead.
They did. A big leap of faith in their technology and the crew.
And it worked.
It did. Apollo 8, first crewed mission to orbit the moon, major win in the space race.
A turning point, I'd say.
Definitely. It showed that NASA could be methodical, sure, but they could also be daring, adapt to the situation,
Yeah, yeah.
seize the moment. And that flexibility was key as they got closer to landing on the moon.
Yeah, because that's the big one, right? The thing everyone remembers, the lunar landings. Apollo 11, those first boot prints, captured the world's attention.
Iconic images.
Totally. But Apollo 11 was just the start, right?
It was. They actually had 6 successful Apollo missions that landed on the moon.
Wow, 6.
Apollo 11 proved it could be done.
Right.
But those later missions from 12 to 17, they were all about exploring the moon, doing the science, really understanding it.
It's amazing how they built on each other, you
Yeah,
know?
it's
For like Apollo 12 landing right near Surveyor 3.
precision landing.
Talk about skill. And then 15, they had the rover.
The moon buggy, cruising around.
Can you imagine driving on the moon?
Each mission brought something new, pushing the limits further. Apollo 14, they had the longest moonwalk at the time.
Wow.
But beyond the achievements, it's important to remember the science. They brought back so much lunar material.
It was over 800 pounds, right?
842 pounds of rock and soil, to be exact.
It's incredible.
It is. And every time they analyze those samples, we learn more about the moon's history, its formation.
It's like a time capsule from space.
Exactly. It totally changed how we understand the moon. And, the impact of Apollo went way beyond the moon itself.
Oh, absolutely. All the technology that came out of it.
Sprint-offs, they call them. Cordless tools, fireproof materials, even medical advancements.
It's like this quest to reach the moon ended up benefiting us in ways they never could have predicted.
It's amazing, isn't it, the ripple effect of these ambitious projects.
But Apollo, sadly, it wasn't immune to budget cuts,
Yeah, those always loom.
Politics change, priorities shift.
Part of the game.
I keep thinking about those canceled missions, Apollos 18, 19, and 20.
Me too.
They were supposed to explore even more of the moon, right?
They were. A real shame they never got off the ground. It's a reminder that even the biggest, most ambitious projects can be affected by funding and politics.
It's true.
But even though it ended early, Apollo's legacy lives on.
Oh, absolutely.
It sparked so much innovation, changed how we see the moon, and, maybe most importantly, inspired generations to look up at the stars and dream.
That sense of wonder, that feeling of possibility, that's what Apollo captured.
It did.
And it's something that resonates with us even today.
It's timeless. Speaking of legacies, there's another side to Apollo that often gets overlooked. The Apollo Applications Program.
Oh, yeah, I was reading about that.
They wanted to use the technology and expertise from Apollo for new things, like Skylab,
Skylab.
first U.S. space station.
It was like an orbiting laboratory, right?
That's it. They did all sorts of experiments up there, studying the sun, growing plants in zero gravity. Pretty cool stuff. And then there was the Apollo-Soyuz test project.
Right. That joint mission with the Soviets in 75.
Yep, an Apollo spacecraft docked with a Soyuz capsule.
Symbolizing like a thaw in the Cold War, right?
Exactly, the beginning of cooperation in space.
It's amazing to think that this program, which started out of competition,
The space race?
ended up leading to collaboration, a shared human endeavor.
Coming full circle?
Yeah. And that spirit's still alive today with the International Space Station?
It is, a testament to Apollo's impact.
For sure. So Apollo was so much more than just a race to the moon. It was exploration, innovation, human resilience.
All of that and more.
A story that continues to inspire.
And that brings us back to our original question. What made the Apollo program so successful? It's tough to pinpoint just one thing, isn't it?
Yeah, was it the political will, the incredible engineers, or maybe the just, I don't know, the sheer determination of the astronauts?
I think it was a mix of all of those. You had a whole nation, really, behind this bold vision and a ton of resources. I mean, you can't even imagine. Poured into the research, the development,
Mm-hmm.
and a workforce that was just, completely dedicated to pushing the limits, seeing what was possible.
And they weren't afraid to take risks either.
No, not at all.
Like with Lunar sending Apollo 8 to the moon when nobody knew for sure it would work.
Right, those were some big decisions. And that shows something really important about why Apollo succeeded. They could adapt.
Okay.
They learned from the setbacks, like the Apollo 1 fire, and they were always refining their approach.
So it wasn't just about having a plan, but also being able to change it when you needed to.
Exactly. Being flexible. And I'm also just blown away by the massive, massive scale of collaboration.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of people working together, each one with their own expertise, all for this one goal.
It's pretty amazing.
It really is. I mean, think about it. In less than 10 years, they went from putting one guy in space to landing two on the moon and bringing them back home. It's incredible.
It really is. It makes you wonder, what other moonshots, like what other huge things could we accomplish today if we had that same kind of, I don't know, spirit,
That drive.
that innovation, that willingness to work together. What could we overcome if we really set our sights on those seemingly impossible goals?
Those are the questions, that Apollo's legacy kind of throws at us.
It
It
does.
reminds us that human potential, it's really limitless.
It is.
Even when things seem, incredibly difficult, incredibly tough, we can do amazing things.
It's inspiring. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Apollo, what's the one thing you want our listener to really take away from all of this?
I think it's this. Apollo wasn't just about reaching the moons. It was about showing what human ingenuity can do.
Yeah.
It was about proving that we're capable of so much more than we think.
It's a powerful message, a reminder that we can achieve anything we set our minds to. So keep exploring, keep asking questions.
Keep that curiosity alive.
And who knows, maybe you'll be part of the next giant leap for humanity. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Apollo program.
It's been my pleasure.
And until next time, keep looking up. 20-day UTA.